The rain fell harder than it had all winter. Through the tinted window of the black limousine, Lila Sterling caught a flash of movement. A woman curled up beside a trash bin, her thin hands trembling as she tried to shield herself from the downpour. "Wait, stop the car," she cried. Her twin, Lana, leaned forward, confused. "Lila, what's wrong?" But Lila was already pressing her face to the glass. "That's her." "Lana, that's Miss Ruth." The car screeched to a halt. The security guards started to protest, but the girls were already out, rain soaking through their coats, sneakers splashing through puddles as they ran toward the woman who once tucked them in at night. Ruth lifted her head slowly, eyes glassy with exhaustion, then widened in disbelief. "Layla? Lana?" Her voice cracked like glass. The twins fell to their knees beside her. Lila grabbed her hand, cold and frail. "What happened to you?" Ruth tried to smile, but her lips quivered. "You shouldn't be here." Lana shook her head, tears cutting paths through the rain. "We've been looking for you for years." Behind them, the chauffeur was shouting for them to come back, but neither moved, because in that single shivering moment on the rain-soaked street, two billionaire daughters realized something their father never had, that the person who once loved them most was the one he'd thrown away, and what they were about to do next would shock the world. Hello? Welcome to another episode of Cardinal Stories, where we share heartwarming stories about love, kindness, and compassion. We post a new story every day. We would be delighted to hear from you. Kindly comment down below where you are watching from. Without wasting much time, let's get started. The Sterling twins were born into a world that glittered. Their father, Alexander Sterling, owned half the skyline: hotels, private jets, luxury brands. Cameras loved the family, but behind the mansion gates, the twins' lives were quieter, lonelier. Lila and Lana, identical in face but opposite in soul. Lila curious and impulsive, Lana thoughtful and cautious. Their mother had died when they were 7, leaving behind 2 children raised by a father who replaced affection with tutors, love with luxury. And once, long ago, there had been Ruth, their nanny, warm, patient, a woman who sang lullabies with the voice of a promise. She had been the only person who made the mansion feel like a home, until one night she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. The girls were told she stole something, but even at 7, they didn't believe it. Ruth didn't steal. She gave. She gave them laughter, stories, hugs. She gave them everything their father didn't. Now 6 years later, at 13, they had everything money could buy and none of what mattered. That rainy night after finding Ruth on the street, they couldn't sleep. Lila sat by the window, her forehead pressed to the glass, whispering, "She looks so lost." Lana hugged her knees. "We should have done something." "What can we do? Dad would never let us help her." Lila turned, her eyes fierce. "Then we don't tell him." Down the hall, the lights in their father's study burned late. Alexander Sterling was on another call, another deal, another empire. His world revolved around numbers, not names. But if he'd looked through the window just once that night, he would have seen his daughters whispering plans, the beginning of a choice that would soon unravel everything he thought he'd built. Because when love returns in the form of guilt, no amount of money can keep it outside the gates. The next morning, while their father attended a business conference, the twins convinced their driver to take a longer route to school. Instead, they drove back to the alley where they'd seen Ruth. She was still there, sitting against a brick wall, a torn blanket around her shoulders, a half-eaten sandwich beside her. When she saw them step out of the car, her eyes widened again. "You shouldn't have come." Lila crouched beside her. "We couldn't just leave you here." Ruth smiled weakly, her face pale and tired. "Life doesn't always give you the home you deserve, sweetheart, but I'm all right." Lana shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, you're not. You are freezing." They helped her into the car before she could protest. By the time the driver realized who she was, it was too late. The twins had already ordered him back to the mansion. Inside the sprawling marble foyer, Ruth hesitated. The last time she stood there, Alexander's voice had echoed through the halls. Cold, accusing, final. "Girls," she whispered, "I can't be here. If your father finds me—" "He won't," Lila insisted. "We'll hide you, just for tonight." Lana guided her quietly into the unused guest wing, the one no one ever entered. They found her clean clothes, food, and a warm blanket. When Ruth finally lay down, her eyes filled with tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry in years. "Why did he fire you?" Lila asked softly. Ruth looked at her hands. "Because he thought I broke something I couldn't replace." "What was it?" Her voice cracked. "His trust." The girls didn't understand, not yet, but in their hearts, they knew. Whatever happened that night long ago wasn't her fault. Outside, thunder rolled across the city again, and the mansion seemed to shudder with it. And as lightning flashed through the glass ceiling, none of them noticed a silhouette watching from the far end of the hallway. Alexander Sterling, frozen in disbelief. The next morning, the house was filled with tension. Alexander's voice thundered through the halls. "Who brought her here?" Lila and Lana stood side by side, small but unyielding. "We did," Lila said. His jaw tightened. "She has no right to step in this house." Ruth stood behind them, hands clasped, eyes lowered. "Mr. Sterling, I never meant—" He cut her off. "You betrayed my family once. You won't do it again." The twins exchanged confused glances. "Betrayed? She loved us," Lana said, tears in her voice. Alexander's eyes flicked toward Ruth, burning with something deeper than anger. Guilt. "You don't understand," he said harshly. "She was dismissed for a reason." Ruth met his gaze for the first time in 6 years. "Tell them the truth, Alexander." A heavy silence filled the hall. Then he turned away. "Pack your things, Ruth. I'll have security escort you." Lila stepped forward, voice trembling but bold. "No, if she leaves, we're leaving too." He froze. The defiance in her voice reminded him of Evelyn, his late wife. "Enough," he said quietly. "This is not up for discussion." Ruth placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. "It's all right, sweetheart." But her calm only made the twins more furious. That night, while Alexander was away, Lila whispered, "He's hiding something." Lana nodded. "Then we'll find out what." They sneaked into their father's private study, the one locked since the night Ruth was fired. Inside, papers were neatly arranged, a framed photo of their mother on the desk. But in the bottom drawer, beneath old ledgers, they found a torn letter, written in their mother's handwriting. Lana's hands shook as she read aloud, "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll take care of Ruth. She's the only one I trust with our girls." The sisters stared at each other, their hearts pounding. So it wasn't betrayal, it was protection. They didn't know yet what Ruth had been protecting them from, but they knew one thing for sure. Their father's story was a lie, and by morning they'd make him tell the truth. Because this time, it wasn't Ruth who was going to be afraid. It was him. The next morning, the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. Alexander had ordered Ruth to leave by noon. Security waited outside. But before the car arrived, a phone call came. Urgent, panicked. His private jet deal in Singapore had collapsed. Investors demanded an emergency video conference. He couldn't leave. Neither could she. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who built his life on control was now trapped in a house with the woman who knew his truth. Ruth spent the morning helping the twins with breakfast. The girls pretended it was a normal day. Pancakes, laughter, sunlight, but every sound carried tension. Every smile trembled. When Alexander walked in, silence felt like a curtain. He poured his coffee, avoiding their eyes. Lila finally spoke. "Why did Mom tell you to protect Ruth?" His hand froze midair. The cup clattered against the counter. "Where did you hear that?" Lana stood tall. "We found her letter." For the first time, his composure cracked. His voice dropped. "That letter wasn't meant for you." "Neither was this life," Lila said softly. "But we got it anyway." Ruth tried to step in, but Alexander raised a hand. Not in anger, but surrender. He walked out wordlessly, retreating to his office. That night, he didn't sleep. Memories clawed their way back. Evelyn's voice, Ruth's pleading eyes. The night it all fell apart. He'd accused Ruth of something unspeakable, stealing a diamond bracelet that once belonged to Evelyn. The truth? He'd found it days later in Evelyn's own drawer. But by then, pride had sealed his lips. And now the woman he wronged was back, caring for the daughters who reminded him of every lie he'd ever told. By dawn, he knew what he had to do, but he didn't know how to do it without shattering everything. The next day, Ruth sat with the twins in the garden. She hadn't slept. The past she'd buried was alive again, whispering her name in every breath of wind. "Miss Ruth," Lana said, her tone gentle. "Why did you really leave?" Ruth looked at them, two pairs of blue eyes so much like their mother's. She hesitated, then sighed. "I didn't leave," she said softly. "I was sent away." Lila frowned. "Because of the bracelet?" Ruth's head lifted in surprise. "You know, we found the newspaper article," Lana whispered. "It said you stole from our family." Ruth's eyes glistened. "I didn't. I swear on everything I love." She told them everything. How Evelyn had worn that bracelet the day she died, how it vanished afterward, and how Alexander's grief turned to rage when he couldn't find it. "He needed someone to blame," Ruth said quietly, "and I was the easiest target." The twins were silent for a moment, processing the enormity of it. Then Lila reached out and took her hand. "You don't have to prove anything to us." But Ruth's voice broke. "Yes, I do, because your father isn't a bad man. He's just broken." What Ruth didn't know was that Alexander stood by the garden door listening, the truth cutting through him like glass. He turned and walked away before they could see the tears. That night, as the girls slept, Alexander opened the drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside, wrapped in silk, was the missing bracelet. He stared at it, the weight of it heavier than any empire he'd built. He placed it on the table and whispered, "Evelyn, what have I done?" The next morning, the twins would find the bracelet, and nothing in that house would ever be the same again. The sun broke through gray clouds, lighting the marble halls in gold. When the twins woke, they found a note on the breakfast table in their father's handwriting. "Come to the library. There's something you should see." They found him standing by the fireplace, holding the bracelet. Ruth stood near the doorway, uncertain whether to enter. Alexander turned toward her. "I owe you an apology I can't afford. Not with money, not with words." Ruth shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "Yes, I do," he said, his voice cracking. "I ruined your life because I couldn't face losing hers. I told myself protecting the girls meant erasing everything that reminded me of my mistakes. But all I did was erase love." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You lied to us." He nodded. "I did, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Ruth stepped forward slowly. "It wasn't just your lie, Alexander. I let it bury me. I should have fought harder." He met her gaze, the first honest look they'd shared in years. Maybe we both needed time to learn what courage really is. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, the sound of time finally moving again. Then Lana whispered, "So what happens now?" Alexander looked at Ruth, then at his daughters. "Now we start over, all of us." The twins ran to Ruth, wrapping their arms around her waist. She laughed through tears, holding them tight. But outside the library door, the press was already gathering. Someone had leaked photos of the twins bringing Ruth home. Headlines were exploding across social media. "Billionaire's ex-nanny found homeless. Sterling twins' secret rescue." And just like that, a private moment of healing became a public storm. Because in the world the Sterlings lived in, even redemption came with a price. By noon, the world knew. Paparazzi lined the mansion gates, drones buzzed overhead, and headlines screamed across every news feed. "Sterling heirs bring homeless nanny into billionaire estate." The story spread like wildfire. Sympathy, outrage, curiosity. Inside, the mansion was chaos. Assistants called, lawyers panicked, PR teams begged Alexander to control the narrative. But how do you control truth once it's loose? In the middle of it all, Ruth stood quietly by the window, watching the flash bulbs explode outside. Her heart wasn't angry, just tired. She'd lived invisible for years. Now the world suddenly remembered her. Alexander stormed into the room. "They're tearing us apart online. Do you know what this means for my name? My company?" Ruth turned to him calmly. "Maybe it's time your name stood for something other than money." The twins sat on the couch, wide-eyed. "We didn't mean to cause trouble," Lana said softly. "We just wanted to help." Alexander looked at them, his voice breaking. You shouldn't have had to. I should have found her first. His phone rang again, his board members demanding a statement. But before he could answer, Ruth spoke. Let me go, she said gently. You can fix this if I disappear. Lila jumped up. No, you can't leave again. Ruth smiled sadly. Sometimes love means stepping back. Alexander looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he saw not the woman he blamed, but the woman who'd once saved his daughters from loneliness. I won't let you take the blame again, he said quietly. The press outside chanted, Sterling, Sterling. The sound grew louder. He turned to his daughters. Stay here. Then he walked outside, into the cameras, the microphones, the shouting. And as the world watched, Alexander Sterling did something he'd never done before. He told the truth. The press conference began as a spectacle. Reporters shouting, flashes popping. Alexander stood behind the podium, Ruth beside him, the twins watching from the balcony above. He began simply, 6 years ago, I fired a woman who didn't deserve it. I blamed her for something she didn't do. Today, I want the world to know the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He held up the diamond bracelet. This was the reason. I thought she stole it. I was wrong. I found it months later, but was too proud to admit it. His voice faltered. In my pride, I destroyed her life, and in her grace, she forgave me before I ever asked. Ruth's eyes shimmered. The reporters fired questions. Are you offering her compensation? Will she press charges? But Ruth stepped forward. I don't want money, she said softly into the microphone. I just want the world to remember that kindness can't be bought, and forgiveness doesn't make you weak. The crowd fell silent. In that moment, even the cameras seemed to pause. The billionaire and the nanny, standing side by side, framed by truth. Back inside, the twins ran to Ruth, hugging her tightly. Lila whispered, You're our family. Nothing will ever change that. But that night, when the lights dimmed and the mansion grew quiet again, Ruth sat alone in the garden. The fame, the forgiveness, it all felt too big, too heavy. She looked up at the stars and whispered, Evelyn, it's done. They're safe now. Behind her, footsteps approached. Alexander. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. You didn't have to stand with me today. Yes, I did, she said. They needed to see you be brave. He smiled faintly. I wasn't brave. You were. They stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. Then he asked quietly, Will you stay? Ruth looked toward the house, toward the laughter of the girls drifting through the open windows. I'll stay, she said, but not as a nanny. He nodded, his smile deepening. Then what? Ruth looked at him, her voice soft but certain. As family. Months later, the Sterling mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt alive. Ruth had her own room now, not the servants' quarters, but one beside the twins. The girls insisted. Every morning she cooked breakfast with them, laughter echoing through the kitchen. Alexander often joined them. No phone, no calls, just coffee and quiet smiles. The world had moved on from the scandal, but the people hadn't forgotten. Ruth's story inspired thousands. Donations poured into shelters, interviews aired, and she used the attention to create something lasting. The Evelyn Foundation, a home for displaced women and children. At the opening ceremony, Ruth stood beside Alexander and the twins as reporters gathered once again. This time, not for gossip, but gratitude. In her speech, Ruth said, Years ago, I lost everything because of a lie, but I gained something greater. 2 daughters who taught me that love is the only thing that multiplies when it's shared. The twins beamed up at her, proud. Alexander took the microphone next. For years, I thought power meant never apologizing, but love proved me wrong. The crowd applauded softly, some wiping tears. Later that evening, as the guests left and the sun dipped low, the 4 of them sat by the garden Evelyn once planted. Roses blooming again after years of neglect. Lana whispered, Do you think Mom can see us? Ruth smiled. I think she never stopped. The girls leaned their heads against her shoulders. Alexander looked at them. his family, and whispered, "Thank you, Ruth, for bringing her back to us." Ruth's eyes glistened. "She never left, Alexander. She was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." A soft breeze swept through the garden, carrying petals into the fading light, as if Evelyn herself had answered. And in that quiet golden hour, the family that once shattered finally learned the truth. Ruth had always lived by, love isn't proven by wealth or blood, it's proven by courage. The end.